Hello everyone, I'm Afreen John and welcome to the exclusive interview series by South Asia Research Institute for Minorities. Today we have very honorable and special guest for interview. I'm very excited to talk with her. But before that, we have an introductory video. Let's have a look.
My name is Mary Lawlor and I am the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders. Defenders, including 38 women human rights defenders, were killed in 35 countries.
Mary Lawlor took up the mandate of Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defender on 1st May 2020, following the Human Rights Council Decision 43/115. She is an adjunct professor of business and human rights in the Centre for Social Innovation CSI School of Business, Trinity College Dublin. She is a member of the advisory board for the School of Business. She is also the advisory board of the Centre for Ethics in Public Life School of Philosophy, University College Dublin. She has worked extensively with and on the situation of human rights defender. In 2001, she founded Frontline Defenders, the international foundation for the protection of human rights defenders, to concentrate on human rights defender at risk. As executive director from 2001 to 2016, Ms. Lawlor represented Frontline Defenders and had a key role in its development. Welcome, Mary, and thank you so much for giving your time. How are you?
I'm very well. That was an interesting trip back into part of my past.
Thank you so much. Mary Lawlor, founder of Frontline Defender. Without any much ado, I think let's start today's interview. My question is, could you say a few words regarding the Frontline Defender? What are the objectives of this organization and how long has it been in existence?
Yes, well, I set up Frontline Defenders in 2001 to work exclusively on the protection of human rights defenders at risk. And we wanted to provide round-the-clock assistance and contribute to the protection of human rights defenders through a program that they decided themselves, which basically in the end grew and grew, and it is consisted of advocacy, grants for security, capacity building in digital security and personal security, and how to measure risk assessment, giving awards every year to human rights defenders and bringing them together to learn from each other and strategize about how better to protect themselves. So everything is based around the needs of human rights defenders at risk.
First, many congratulations that you have been recently appointed UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defender. What does this job entail, and is there a particular project are you working on now?
Well, I was appointed last May a year ago, and I decided to take a people-centered approach to the mandate, meaning that I want to concentrate on human rights defenders wherever they are around the world who are at risk because of their human rights work. So the way you do that, if you're a special rapporteur, is, and it's pretty much defined. If you get a complaint into the inbox by an NGO or a group of human rights defenders or a single human rights defender, then you can do a communication, which is a formal letter to the authorities, and asking them about the situation of the human rights defender and asking for information and looking for their response to all these allegations. And then sometimes they respond, more often they don't. Then you can also issue press releases, and twice a year you have country visits. You can go, except now in COVID, we've no country visits. You go twice a year to countries to make official give visits with the government's permission. You can also do what they call academic visits, which are just informal visits. And finally, you do a report to the General Assembly and the Human Rights Council every year. So that's basically the way it works. But I see myself as a bridge between human rights defenders and governments. And I think the added value of a special rapporteur is that you can talk to governments in a way that when you're in civil society, you might not have had the possibility to.
Okay, moving forward, do you think the UN, with the relatives working and hierarchical and exclusive decision-making process, can bring the countries and people together in peaceful, meaningful way?
If there wasn't a UN, somebody would have to make it up, because whatever people say about it, it is the only forum that brings together all the countries of the world and as member states to debate and discuss and try and come to some resolution. And one of the most difficult things for me when I took up the mandate was actually learning how to navigate the UN system, even though I had been involved in lobbying the UN, both with Amnesty International first and then as in Frontline. But I am independent of the UN. I'm not part of the machinery or the staff. I serve in a voluntary capacity. I'm independent of states, and I'm independent of any NGOs. And as I say, I focus on individual cases. And just to give you an idea of what I've decided on about my priorities. Human rights defenders who are marginalized, who are very remote, who are in isolated areas, who have no contact, I want to try and reach them in a better way. Of course, women human rights defenders and LGBTI human rights defenders as marginalized groups. And also defenders who are working on anti-corruption or who have suffered reprisals because of their contact with the UN. We see that in many countries. And also in the context of business and human rights, the human rights defenders who are working on land indigenous people's rights and environmental rights, because very often they are indigenous people, minorities themselves.
Mary, what does it mean by theological political, and how does it relate to statelessism, and what is the relationship between the theological political and universalism, as well as all the principles that it concentrates: democracy, human rights, equality, and so on?
If you are talking about the difference between secularism and the pursuit of democracy, human rights, and equality as part of that, and pitted against, for example, fundamentalism or patriarchy, religious fundamentalism, clearly they're two very different approaches. But I'd be very interested in hearing what you mean by that, because it's not a term I've come across before.
Actually, I just wanted to the difference between secularism and theological, political, and universalism.
Well, universalism is, if you look at the UN Declaration on Human Rights, it was adopted by all member states of the UN, and it is the basis for the approach that all member states have agreed as the principles that everyone is entitled to, simply because they are human. So that's what I would think of as a universalism. And it also should override any particular fundamentalist approach, be it religious or be it political or be it militaristic or whatever it is. So I would always say that, you have to go back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And in my case, the Declaration on Human Rights Defenders, which was adopted by consensus in 1998 by the UN member states.
Okay, well, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Well, moving forward to the next question, my question is, in a tolerant and democratic society, what is the ideal role of Tetra trial? What are its boundaries?
Well, this is an interesting question, because if you look at the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, freedom of expression is a right, and freedom of association and assembly is a right. And oftentimes, defenders are criminalized for making satirical or critical statements about their governments. And free speech must be respected, and criticism and debate, it's part and parcel of a living democracy where people feel able to discuss and debate. It doesn't mean that they may be right, but it means they should have the right to express their opinion. And we see in many countries around the world that criticism of governments is often is not allowed, and very often governments say that they are terrorists or they're threatening security. And this can be from anything from somebody just criticizing some government policy to somebody making a cartoon or somebody writing a song or something like that. So it is pervasive. So I think that, unless the freedom of expression is negative in that it is hate speech and it's detrimental to the security and safety of human rights defenders, then it should be allowed.
Okay, moving forward to the next question. What are your thoughts on the current state of religious liberty in South Asia? What are the main concerns of minorities in that region?
Well, I have tried to gain, since I started the mandate, and be very fair about taking up cases all over the world, to make sure I have a balance on themes and issues. And I've engaged in online events and talked to many human rights defenders from India, from Afghanistan, from Pakistan, and from Sri Lanka. But they're not always religious minority issues. It depends on the people who want to talk to me, as long as they are at risk, and the people that we find. And this is where, for example, you could be very helpful in that if there are religious minority human rights defenders at risk, that you would contact me with some names, and we could set up from South Asia, and we could set up meetings with them. Now, for example, the mandate has written to the Indian government on the deterioration situation for the defense of human rights in Jammu and Kashmir, in particular, on a number of occasions since last May, and particularly on the disproportionate effect that the Citizenship Amendment Act has on Muslim minorities in the country. But defenders belonging to religious minorities are also are often targeted for their beliefs, regardless of whether or not they defend the minorities of the freedom of religion to religious belief or not. And if you look at the case in India, I'm sure you know the case of Father Stan Swami very well. I've been following that case very closely since last October, because he has spent his life working on minority rights. And what I find particularly shocking is that he's 84, he's very much at risk of COVID. He has Parkinson's disease. He can't even feed himself. And so it's a very particular terrible case. And all he has done, he has worked pretty much all his life since the 70s. on the rights of Adivasi minority indigenous people and the Dalit community. So that's a case that for example, I've been following. But that's just, those two are just examples. So, I have other examples from Pakistan and other countries.
Well, Mary, definitely I'm agree with you. I think religion is like a pair of shoes. Find one that fits for you, but don't make me wear your shoes. Religion and liberty might be supposed to be mean that everybody is free to discuss religion. Well, moving forward to the next question. My question is, what are the typical stumbling blocks in the disputes over free speech and religious and cultural sensibilities? What can the government in South Asia do to less like livelihood for conflict?
Well, I think that uh, governments have to recognize the legitimacy and the credibility of human rights defenders in accordance with the Declaration on Human Rights Defenders, because their work is concerned with protecting the rights enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other standards to which all those governments have agreed. So that is their obligation. And what they should be doing, in my view, is to make public statements about the credibility and legitimacy of human rights defenders and to stop themselves provoking discrimination and violence by making statements that stigmatize their work. Because very often you see the governments or government officials or local officials or police or something like that making negative statements about human rights defenders and saying that they are thugs or they're terrorists or something or other. They brand them as, or in case of women, it could be bad mothers or whores or whatever they pick themselves. And this creates a very bad environment. So the lead has to come from governments and they have to be very clear about the legitimacy of the work of human rights defenders.
Well, Mary, I read your report, Final Warning, Death Threats and Killing of Human Rights Defender. More than 100 of human rights defenders killed each and every year. Well, I want to ask, due to the widespread use of violence against human rights defenders in South Asia region, how could you classify which country defenders are more insecure, protected, or unsafe?
Well, I never answered that question because I don't ever grade countries. As far as I'm concerned, if a human rights defender is not allowed to do their peaceful human rights work, they should be protected. And it's not about having a list of the worst countries in the world. It's about each individual person. That's the way I approach my mandate. So, I just don't get into saying which are the worst. Of course, there are a number of countries in Asia, and like there are around the world, that are pretty poor at protecting human rights defenders.
Okay, moving forward to the next question. What do you believe the chances are for more South Asian exchange dialogues and corruptions?
Well, I'm always looking to engage with human rights defenders, and particularly the ones I talked about earlier, the most isolated and remote. So again, I just like to reiterate that if you know of human rights defenders at risk from minorities or religious minorities, I'd be very happy to set up meetings with them and see how and what I could do to contribute to their safety.
Okay, my next question is, do you believe there are enough people and mass mobilization in South Asia for it to be considered a peaceful movement? What makes it that way?
You can never have enough people working peacefully for human rights and mobilizing. And, there won't be a tipping point until more people are engaged in peaceful human rights work. And to be considered a peace movement than there are, in society who are against the kind of values that human rights defenders portray. And we see all around the world and in South Asia, there is a hardening of the space and a hardening of attitudes to human rights defenders. And but they need, in my view, to build their networks. They should connect regionally so that they can coordinate their efforts. And also, I always remember Hina Jelani. I saw that picture there with Hina Jelani and Mary Robinson. And Hina said to me, because as you know, she was the first UN special representative on human rights defenders. And she herself was in danger in Pakistan. And she said her protection came from her network. And I have heard other people around the world say the same thing. You need to build a network that you can go to if you're in danger, and you need to build your allies, and you need to come together to be stronger and to try and create a safe environment for you and an atmosphere free from discrimination and intimidation.
Oh, well, definitely nobody can bring you peace but yourself. My question is, what more do you like the international communities could have done to protect South Asian persecuted minorities?
Well, I think that the role of embassies in country is very important, and I think human rights defenders from persecuted minorities should try and reach out to those embassies that are in country, and particularly the ones that may have a more human rights friendly approach, so that if they are in danger, then that embassy can intervene. And for example, in the case of the European Union embassies, the European Union have adopted guidelines on human rights defenders, and part of it is that their embassies should be contributing to the protection of human rights defenders by doing things like receiving them in their embassy, going to their places of work, making visible their work, acknowledging their work, all the things that helps a human rights defender stay safe. So I would say that definitely the role of embassies in country is a good place to start. And also international organizations. There are a lot of international organizations that help protect human rights defenders now, and minorities. For example, Asia Women in Law and Development, or Asia Forum for Human Rights. There are lots of regional organizations and regional bodies. So that's where I would start. And of course, not enough has been done, but the problem is, it is a huge problem, and there's a limited resource of people. But human rights education in country is really important, I think, because it really should be taught in the schools so that the values of human rights would become inculcated in society, and it would make the job a bit easier.
Mary, my next question. Hate speech and sentiments to hatred have become more common in South Asia, with the serious consequences for religious, ethnic, linguistic, and gender minorities. Major groups in this region have a long history of openly using historical rhetoric assembled by senior leaders to propagate and reinforce stereotypes and prejudice towards minorities. To this purpose, new opportunities given by the digital technology, particularly television and social media platforms, have been successfully used to specifically focus on the solution of peace. What are the available approaches, instruments, and strategies to deal with this problem?
This is a very difficult problem, and one that I think everyone is trying to grapple with. And as you know, my most recent report to the Human Rights Council looked at the killings of human rights defenders, and it found that in many cases, killings were preceded by threats or warnings, many of which were online. And the problem with that is that it sort of smears the human rights defender. It sets them up for further attacks. And sometimes, sadly, in many cases, they ended up being killed. So social media companies have a specific and definite responsibility, which they are not fulfilling. And so they should be consulting substantially with human rights defenders in the country to learn the context and to see how they can help. They should publicly recognize their role and condemn any attacks against them. And they should provide data to assist legal investigations, into online threats. But the real thing is they have to take down the online threats as quickly as possible. They have to be transparent as well about the processes that they use when these kind of online threats are taking place, because the social media companies aren't transparent in their processes. And there should be somebody in each country that understands the context that human rights defenders are working in, that they have an access point to and that they can go to if there's something harmful posted about them online, that they have the direct contact with them to take them down. Now, Facebook is trying to, for example, they brought in a policy on human rights defenders, which is a first step, but really, they at the moment, it's not anything like it should be, and needs an awful lot of investment and improvement in ensuring that threats can be taken down and people have somewhere to go to.
Well, definitely, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Moving forward, well, COVID-19, we all are passing from the situation. My question is, there are fears that COVID-19 may exacerbate that already tough situation for minorities in South Asia, as some governments in this region utilize diverse languages and speed efforts, cultivating civil liberties. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, the thing about minorities is that they are always among the most marginalized in the world, no matter who or where they are. And they are always the ones most at risk. For example, in January 2021, in Pakistan, trans rights defenders Nayab Ali and Hira Malik were attacked. Nayab was bound and beaten by unidentified men for 3 hours and had her belongings stolen, and she was threatened with death if she spoke out for the trans community in Pakistan any further. And of course, the authorities refused to register the attacks initially or provide protection. And we've also seen enforced disappearances, as you know, in FATA, in the federally administered tribal areas in Pakistan, where, for example, Idris Khatak, the Pashtun human rights defender, was himself disappeared from November 2019 to June 2020, and because of his work on disappearances. And he's still in military custody, and not many details are known about his case. And that, of course, is being tried under the Official Secrets Act, which should not happen. But I think the problem with COVID is that it has made human rights defenders a sitting target. Because of the regulations that governments have put in place, they haven't been able to move to safer spaces. And so everyone knows where they are. And as well as that, I mean, we've had doctors and health workers and journalists who have tried to either report on the situation of human rights defenders or the mismanagement of the government, all being criminalized. So you can see how anyone who was trying to tell the truth about COVID in their country was being criminalized. And some governments have taken the smoke screen, use COVID as a smoke screen to further retaliate against human rights defenders. But so they're the bad things. But on the good side, I suppose, people have connected online more. I remember talking to a defender who said he had never been in touch with anyone, and he found this internet great because he was able to go to meetings, to connect with people and to learn. But it raises the issue of digital security. And the digital security, as we know, is hugely important. And defenders do not take digital security seriously enough. Now, there has been an improvement during COVID because they've had to realize that they have to protect themselves online. So it has been brought to the fore, and defenders understand that some of them anyway, understand that they have to use more secure platforms. So there are a lot of pluses and minuses that human rights defenders can learn from the experience. But overall, I'm afraid to say that it has been a negative one for human rights defenders during COVID.
Well, moving forward, my next question is 1.9 million seems people are de facto stateless as a result of the National Register for Citizens (NRC), while protecting all other significant religious purpose, the Citizenship Amendment Act CAA, minorities' rights, the discourse against Muslims. How do you feel about this?
Well, as I said before, I've written to the Indian government twice on this issue of human rights defenders who've been arbitrarily detained for their peaceful advocacy against the Citizenship Amendment Act. And one of these was a woman called Safura Zargar, who is pregnant. She's coming up to 6 months, I think. And also Akhil Gogai, who is working for the rights of indigenous communities in Assam. So not only have we written about the act itself, but we've written about defenders who have been targeted for their work to defend those affected by the act. The arrests are part of a wider pattern of targeting those who defend minority rights. The Unlawful Activities Prevention Act tries to conflate human rights advocacy with terrorist activity and is completely inconsistent with international standards. And it's disgraceful how peaceful speeches in defense of human rights can now be considered a form of terrorism in India, and that Muslim Indians are now considered infiltrators in their own land. So it is something I am following and will continue to work on.
Well, last but not the least, my question is, what is the most essential words of advice you could give to the young academics?
I think that you have to decide how you want to live your life. You have to decide, are you going to try and live a meaningful life that will contribute to the well-being of other people? Are you going to be kind? What are you going to do with your life? Or are you going to join the tribes? And when I mean by tribes, people who are stuck together in little bubbles and who are afraid to move out of their bubble for one reason or other. They stay insular all their lives. I mean, the world is a beautiful place, and it is made up of so many people of different nationalities and different perspectives. And it is such a joy to be able to reach out to people and learn from them and be with them. But it is a choice, and you have to choose civilization every day. It's not something that comes easily. You have to make a choice when you get up in the morning that you are going to do something to make the world a better place for other people.
Minority rights or human rights are basic rights that belong to all of us because simply we all are human beings. They embody key values in our society such as fairness, dignity, equity, and respect. Most importantly, these rights give us power and enable us to speak up because to the challenges poor treatment for a public authority. Thank you so much, Mary Lawlor, for giving your precious and valuable time to us. It was truly, and really wonderful to talk.
And good luck with your work, and may it benefit all human beings.
Thank you so much. Now, Afreen John is signing off for today's interview. Remember, be in your prayers. Take care. Goodbye. God bless you all.